So Elaminopy, you kind of had the reverse journey, I understand.
Yes. Well, where did you hear that?
Is that's what you put on Personality Cafe? Or in brief when you responded?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I've talked about it before in other threads, so I was wondering if you were getting other information from other places. But um, yeah, kind of very opposite actually. Um, I was born in a uh, Christian home, to a very religious church, and it was one where, I mean, it's non-denominational. It's a very small church. It was in a different state actually, but we have three different main um, congregations in three different states. Um, but this it was one where it was very exclusive. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
like the belief is, once you're baptized, then you're freed of all sin. You're forgiven of all sin, no matter what. Murder, even uh, everything. We had a guy where he used to be in a gang, and he would tell stories. Not proud of them, but he would tell stories of how he used to be involved in like curb stompings. Um, and so it's just you can be forgiven for anything, um, but once you are, you have to you get the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, and that helps you to remain free from sin. Um,
And that perspective seems religious to you as opposed to spiritual? Or do you make that distinction?
um,
Is that an NT distinction? Maybe.
I'm not sure.
Um, of all of, with all of the intuitives anyway that I've discussed vaguely this issue with, um, the idea of spirituality is something that is more internally dwelling as opposed to religion, which is externally enforced.
Okay, well, I wasn't talking about um, myself. I was more talking about my
Right, for them. But did you feel that they were doing that to enforce group norms, which is, of course, rather anti what we all stand for as TI users? Or did you feel that they really sincerely did those things out of internal convictions?
I think they did those things. You mean as far as the church?
Yeah, the people in the church.
Um, because they felt this was what God's message was. This was the only way to go to heaven.
Okay. So that would be a religious, a dogmatic
I
restriction.
I always viewed it more as um, it's like you do this or you go to hell. So whether you like it or not, you just do it. It's the rules.
Mm.
It's the rules of existence, pretty much. Um, but like if you there were certain, like, if you lied, then it's no big deal. You have to make it right with the person who you lied to, and then you have to seek forgiveness from God.
Mm.
But so like no one ever lied in the church. I growing up, I never heard one cuss word in my house.
Mm-hmm. Me
Um,
neither.
and um, God forbid you had sex before marriage. Um, I never even had a girlfriend until I moved out. But there were certain things like certain sins that were considered sins unto death, and those were things, like sex before marriage is one of them. Where if once you were already in the church and you had committed them, you were now, as they called it, marked, which is essentially excommunicated.
Wow.
You are spiritually dead. You don't have the spirit of God anymore. You have pretty much gotten rid of it. And as far as God is concerned, you're dead and you're actually worse off than if you had never come to him in the first place. I guess I don't know what exact scripture that it is, but they talks about twice dead and plucked up by the roots. Like it's better to have never known God than have known and lost Him. I don't know where it says that, but I remember hearing about it from my parents. So like what he was saying, as far as to go and just get your salvation now and try it out. And if it doesn't work out, you can always back out. In my case, that was the opposite. Once you're in for good. Otherwise, you're worse off. So you better really make sure that this is what you want.
And so you decided that that particular thing is not exactly what you wanted.
I think I'm procrastinating.
Okay.
It's hard when you were raised with it not to believe it. I guess it's sort of like people in older times, like in the South, that were raised that blacks were evil, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It was just part of what they believed, and then I see them and I respect a lot of them, and it's hard to not believe it. But they have hope for me. But so I guess but since I was raised in it, it's kind of like, well, I want to be out and be my own person first. I want to do my own thing first. I don't, if I want to cuss, then I want to be able to. If I want to watch movies that have bad stuff in them, then I want to be able to, and not have to worry about everything I do if it's going to be, if it's considered right before God or not. And so I went out and and I hear stories of most people who came in the churches because they didn't like how they were. They thought bad thoughts all the time, and but they couldn't help it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just human nature, and they didn't like it. And then finally they came to God, and He helped them to be able to not be in that burden. And I just thought, but I'm not burdened by that. There's nothing that I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm content how I am. I like how I am. I don't want to be any other way. So if I were to go in and serve God in the way that the church says I would need to, it wouldn't be for myself at all. It would be only so I don't go to hell. As far as what I believe now, and I think having introverted thinking, of course, you pick it apart, and you wonder, does this make sense? And you see anything that's logically inconsistent. But then a lot of it's like the flying spaghetti monster. You can't prove or disprove. So it becomes kind of where you're just going around in circles, and you're not going to ever get anywhere if you just try to analyze it a lot of times. It's like, well, the Bible says this, and it's like, okay, well, the Bible was written by men. It's like, well, they were inspired by God. Well, it says they, and so there really is no way to prove. But then that doesn't mean that it's not true, because what if it is? There's so many things. It's like people in the 1700s, they didn't know what atoms were, but they still existed. That doesn't mean they didn't exist because they didn't have technology at the time. And maybe God's some being in some other dimension that we don't have access to, even in our three spatial dimensions. And I remember when I was a kid, even my mom she was the one that taught me mainly, because my dad was at work. But she would say more things like, well, there's one and only one God, and I'm like, well, yeah, it says him, but if we're like elements in a computer game, I guess, um, by comparison, then yeah, we're gonna have to believe whatever the the player says. There's no way that we could ever know. Like, this could just be some school project for him.
The evil demon argument. Yeah, there are all kinds of
I mean, it still could be
philosophically lovely things.
it could be for good. It doesn't mean it have to be for evil, but it could still just be just something he did to pass the time.
Yep. And we don't do that either. There we went again. Fascinating.
But
Yep.
I guess I don't really require um, spirituality to be content. I don't feel like I need something else. It's just more something that's interesting when you hear stories about it. I don't know. I guess I'm just content how I am and how things are.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's hard for me to go seeking it and to be spiritual. I just consider it like a topic that I'm not too interested in most of the time. Once in a while, something will come up, and I'll get really interested in it, and then I'll get the Bible, and I'll look through things, and then like my wife is like, "You're getting all religious on me now," but I see it as an interest, but not something that I need or is like really important to me.
Okay. Well, my experience is different yet again. My grandfather is a pastor, or retired now, but pastor in the Nazarene Church. His father was a circuit pastor. Both of my father's brothers are pastors. Actually, my grandparents were also missionaries to South Africa, and they went to Ireland and church built there and stuff like that. My father is not a pastor. He's the black sheep of the family, but he was choir director for quite some time, and he's now an elder in his church. And currently, I am the default preacher at my church, as it happens. Now, that's a strange circumstance. I'm not an ordained minister, but our church is now modeled kind of like the Society of Friends, and we take turns giving messages. And being an ENTP, it's much less difficult, much less draining, and also because of my huge background of Bible knowledge and things, it's just easier for me to put something together, so I do it more often than anyone else. But I have a very, very, very different understanding and relationship to my faith than the rest of my family does. My extended family is mostly sensors, and mostly SJs, and they have the because it's true, because that's how it was passed on to me kind of thing. I can't believe that. I cannot go with that. That would be hideously disingenuous to everything that I am, and I have to question. And many, even some of my friends and some of my family members are alarmed by the questions that I ask and the conjectures that I entertain. But to me, I'm an NT. I have to ask those questions. The only reason to not question is because I'm afraid that the answer is no. And that's an act of unfaith, not an act of faith. So I go through some low periods in my faith where I'm like, okay, I really can't tell the difference between faith in God and faith in a flower pot here. I need some help. But I usually come back out of them because in the end, no matter what, there are other problems with the Bible, like the book of Job, everything happens in threes. If you've ever noticed, everything like there are 6 episodes and they all happen in threes, and that's a fairy tale right there. Fairy tales are structured in threes. So I have to entertain the possibility that that is in fact just a story. Now, on the other hand, so my grandparents, etc., are very invested in the idea that the Bible is historically accurate. On the other hand, I know for a fact that the idea that we have of historical accuracy did not exist 6,000, 4,000 years ago. Nobody had any concept of empirical accuracy and research methods. That was not even a thing that existed on the planet, and they did not intend to create a document that was historically flawless. They intended to create a document that would be spiritually informative and morally informative, to tell people what their relationship was to their creator and what their relationship therefore should be to other people and the rest of creation. And
entertainment to keep people interested.
Some of the stories have enough sex and violence in them. You'd think that they had entertainment in mind as well.
Or even the in threes part.
Oh, that's true. And it's also not necessarily that Job never existed or that nobody ever had, although I have other issues with that, but maybe they told the story in the structure of a fairy tale, even though that's not how it actually went down. Especially things that have extended dialogue. Nobody sat down with a stylist and was taking dictation at the time, so obviously that can't be the actual dialogue as it went down. It was somebody's reconstruction of the dialogue, at best. So I think there are actually different genres of biblical literature, and some of them are intended to be factual, like Kings and Chronicles, and I keep losing my earbuds, but they were intended obviously as historical documents, and others were not. But I felt a little bit threatened by this because of my upbringing, and I thought, wait a minute, Jesus told parables. Can't the Old Testament people tell parables too? Isn't that fine? Oh yeah, it should be fine. So that was fine, and I got over some of the factual or stylistic inconsistencies in the Bible. But the thing that always makes me feel better is Jesus always told the truth. Whenever he did a miracle and had a miraculous healing or something, he didn't say, I just healed you. He didn't even say God healed you. He always said, your faith has made you well. And even if, and this is T.I. talking, even if Jesus didn't do anything, there was this guy Jesus, and people kept coming to him because he was believed to be a prophet, and he knew that he wasn't doing anything, or even if it's a time traveler, and went back in time and knew exactly what Jesus had to do, and knew that he had no extraterrestrial power, or what, even if that is all the case, he still told the truth. He still said, go, your faith has made you well. And that is the way faith works. Faith does make you well, no matter what your faith is in. I don't want to have faith in a flower pot, but it has been shown in sociological and psychological studies that faith in a flower pot will, in fact, help you get through your day. In a very real way. There's a psychological need for faith in the human psyche. Some more than others. I think that has to do with type. I think intuitives need faith more because to us the entire universe is everything behind the universe. The street corner might as well not exist. I don't care. I might trip over it and then have to brush myself off. But that's okay. I'm willing to take that because I don't care about the street corner. But I do care very, very deeply about why and what the real meaning, the real truth, the real cause, and the real nature of the universe is.
I think
yeah.
with NI you see a street corner and you're like, well, that's just a whole bunch of atoms being held together.
Yeah. That, although I have NE, so If the street corner exists, it exists because I have imagined a Rube Goldberg machine that would require something to fall off the street corner in order to start cooking off or something. But yeah, that's very much the case. So
your story about Jesus brings to mind like when he was touched from behind. It's like, who touched me?
mm-hmm.
It was healed. It's like it wasn't even his will. It was done without his even his consent.
Yeah, yeah. You can make a very horrible phrase out of that. I will refrain on the internet. But yeah, it's true. It's very true. And other things like there's a fantastic little thing in the Gospels where Jesus crossed the lake to get there, and he crossed the lake to get here, and he crossed the lake again to get to the same place. You know, who cares, really? I don't think the gospel writers were thinking about geography when they wrote it. I think they were thinking about Jesus and what he did. You know,
the funny thing is, like, when I read the Bible, I look at those things. I try to figure out, like, okay, so he's been at this location. He started in this city. He went across the lake. And he did this little miracle thing here, and then he went back. And then I look, okay, so I'm like analyzing these little facts just because I find them interesting, and trying to put together this picture of who he's met and how much time he spent in this place and why he, why was he there, like, just for that one purpose. So
yeah.
And they have maps in the backs of them so you can.
Yeah.
I love the archaeological facts and things. We did a Bible study, and some of the facts just kind of made me ooh, because they're sometimes there are similar Canaanite stories, like the saga of Gilgamesh and the story of Noah. And we have no proof that Noah came before Gilgamesh. That, again, is not proof that Noah didn't come first. But inferences mean more to me because I'm intuitive. My entire universe in my head is inferences, and I'm good at them. And sometimes the lightning tells me that somebody said this way because they had an agenda, and it's really hard for me to dismiss that. But I always come back to, if all else fails, Jesus told the truth. And I even am not entirely sure about the afterlife, actually. Because, and I'll tell you why, in the Old Testament, there is very little, if any, talk about the afterlife. In fact, it's a bargaining chip used. Moses used it, David used it, and many other people bargained with God, please spare my life, because if I go to Sheol, I won't be able to sing your praises. Which means that they didn't have an idea of going to God in heaven. And Sheol was just a classic underworld scenario where you just kind of hang out with worms. But then there was, and it was very much retributive theology. Retributive theology is where you get what you deserve in this life, whether you did good or bad. God will reward or punish you. And they expected retribution, good or bad, in this life. They totally expected that. And one way that they could diffuse immediate reward or punishment was by having a collectivist culture. So the proverb was the fathers eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge, right? So if you did not experience the consequences of your sin or greatness, your children would. And if they didn't, well, their children's children would, or the nation would. So there's a general diffusion of responsibility and retribution until the persecution of Antioch Epiphanes, and this happened in between the two testaments. I'm reading the Apocrypha now, which is another whole can of worms. Whoa, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, I'm reading Second Maccabees currently. I have to say, some of this stuff is on acid. Other stuff is very fascinating, and it's getting a lot of perspective and point of view, understanding what people were thinking and what their faith and their belief structure was in between the two testaments. Is very informative and fascinating. But suddenly around the Maccabean revolt, now is the first time that you have unequivocal, there will be retribution in the afterlife. That's what the afterlife is for. So my lightning tells me and I cannot dismiss this because it's pretty darn insistent, that the belief in an afterlife was because belief in real-time Earth retribution was no longer tenable. That the Jewish faith had reached a point of persecution under the Seleucids, where they had to either abandon their faith structure in Yahweh or accommodate, and so they accommodated. So I still don't really know what I believe about that. I'm holding this paradox and hoping that my NI will eventually kick in and resolve this for me. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because my faith still saves me every single day. It saves me for myself. If I were my own God, because that's what would happen if I ditched the God of my ancestors anyway, I wouldn't go to any other God. I would in fact just live for myself completely. And I know very horribly what kind of person that would make me, and that is not what I choose for my life. And I'm actually kind of proud of the person I'm becoming as I maintain my faith. So even though this is neither necessary nor sufficient, it's where I'm going to stay.